Right now, in a calm city in eastern China and a quiet town in upstate New York, two rival visions of tomorrow are being poured into concrete, threaded through cable, and chilled to temperatures colder than outer space. And whoever crosses the finish line first could end up reshaping the balance of global power. This is the race to build quantum data centers, and almost no one outside the tech industry truly grasps how enormous, how costly, and how genuinely alarming the stakes have grown. We're not talking about standard data centers stuffed with the kind of servers that power the apps on your phone. We're talking about facilities engineered to hold machines that compute using the strange logic of quantum physics, machines that could one day shatter modern encryption, model entire molecules atom by atom, and crack problems that would keep today's most powerful supercomputers busy for far longer than the universe has existed. Both China and the United States understand precisely what's on the line, and each nation is now pouring unprecedented amounts of money into making sure the other doesn't get there first. By the time this video ends, you'll know exactly who currently has the edge, how each country's approach differs, and why this quiet, jargon-heavy race could turn out to be one of the defining geopolitical stories of this decade. Let's begin with the dollars, because the scale of financial commitment on both sides tells you almost everything about how seriously these governments are treating this competition. China has woven quantum computing into its newest 5-year plan as one of only 7 frontier technologies the country has flagged as a top priority, putting roughly $16 billion in public money behind it, a sum analysts say is about 4 times larger than what Washington has committed so far. Sit with that figure for a moment. China's government alone is reportedly outspending the entire U.S. federal quantum budget 4-fold, and that gap has been widening for years, not months. If that number just caught you off guard, smash that like button right now, because how these two nations are spending their money is even more revealing than the totals themselves. China's strategy is almost entirely top-down and state-controlled, concentrating its people, funding, and physical buildings into a small number of massive flagship projects, instead of scattering resources across dozens of rival private firms. The centerpiece of this whole approach is located in a city called Hefei in Anhui Province, home to what's widely regarded as the largest national quantum research complex on Earth. It's a campus sprawling across nearly 100 acres, with reported investment hitting $10 billion for this site alone. This isn't a research lab in any conventional sense. It's closer to an entire quantum city, anchored by the University of Science and Technology of China, ringed by spin-off companies, propped up by provincial government money, and treated as a national priority on par with how nuclear weapons research was once treated during the Cold War. If you had no idea a facility this enormous even existed, drop a comment below right now, because most people have genuinely never heard of Hefei, even though it might be the single most important quantum hub on the planet. Now let's turn to the United States, because America's approach looks almost nothing like China's centralized blueprint, and that contrast could end up being either the country's biggest vulnerability or its biggest advantage, depending on how this race plays out. Rather than funneling everything into one government-run megaproject, the American ecosystem is intentionally spread out, built from a web of more than 40 different companies, national labs, universities, and tech giants, all competing and partnering at the same time. IBM by itself has pledged $10 billion over 5 years toward its quantum roadmap, centered on a new quantum data center under construction in Poughkeepsie, New York, built to house a machine called IBM Quantum Starling, which the company says will be the world's first large-scale fault-tolerant quantum computer by 2029. To grasp the scale of that machine's power, IBM has noted that fully representing Starling's computational state would take the combined memory of more than a quintillion of today's most powerful supercomputers, a number so vast it barely registers as real. This is exactly the moment to hit subscribe, because the figures in this race only get more mind-bending from here. And IBM isn't going it alone. The company has also unveiled plans for Andorran, billed as the first dedicated U.S. quantum chip foundry, alongside an ambitious lineup of modular quantum processors nicknamed Nighthawk, Kookaburra, and Cockatoo, each meant to snap together like building blocks toward an eventual fault-tolerant system. Meanwhile, Google, IonQ, Rigetti, Quantinuum, and a long roster of other American firms are chasing their own separate hardware designs at the same time, each betting on a different physical method for stabilizing qubits, the basic units of quantum information. That variety is the defining feature of America's strategy. Rather than committing everything to one government-chosen technical path, the U.S. ecosystem is effectively running dozens of parallel experiments, betting that more shots on goal raise the odds that at least one approach hits a real breakthrough first. Now here's where things get genuinely interesting, because the answer to who's actually winning changes completely depending on which metric you look at. Judged purely on patent filings, China seems to be running away with it, accounting for roughly 60% of all global quantum computing patent applications, a number that's exploded over the past decade, jumping from just over 1,000 annual filings to more than 7,000 in recent years. China also reportedly tops the charts in 66 out of 74 critical technology categories tracked globally by independent researchers, a sweep that extends far beyond quantum computing alone. But before you conclude the race is already settled, here's the twist most headlines skip entirely. Analysts who dig into this data point out that the bulk of that patent volume is made up of domestic-only filings, often encouraged by government subsidies and academic incentives that reward sheer quantity over real commercial value or enforceability abroad. In other words, China may be constructing what some analysts call a Great Wall of domestic intellectual property, while the United States tends to file patents built to hold up commercially in global markets, including Europe, Japan, and North America. This distinction matters a lot because raw patent counts and genuine commercial dominance aren't the same thing, and blurring the two is exactly how misleading headlines get written. If this kind of nuance is exactly why you watch this channel, make sure you're subscribed, because most coverage of this topic glosses right over these details. Let's break this race down by specific technical area now, because lumping it all under the single banner of quantum technology really oversimplifies what's actually going on. In quantum communications, especially quantum key distribution, which exploits the strange laws of physics to build theoretically unhackable encryption, China holds a clear and well-documented global lead, having constructed a massive fiber optic backbone linking major cities including Beijing, Shanghai, Jinan, and Hefei through quantum-secured links. China has even pulled off satellite-based quantum communication, successfully connecting ground stations across continents using quantum-encrypted signals, a genuinely impressive engineering feat that most Western nations haven't matched at the same scale. That said, when it comes to quantum computing hardware itself, the actual processors and software doing the calculating, the United States still holds what most analysts consider a clear technical lead, driven by companies like IBM, Google, IonQ, and Quantinuum, pushing the raw performance and reliability of their processors forward year after year. In areas like quantum sensors and broader quantum computing architecture, the two countries are often described as essentially neck and neck, trading the lead back and forth depending on whose latest paper or hardware reveal landed most recently. This is exactly why oversimplified headlines asking, "Who's winning the quantum race?" almost always miss the real picture. The honest answer truly depends on which slice of this sprawling field you're examining. Now let's talk about a name that keeps surfacing throughout China's quantum story, because understanding this one person genuinely clarifies why the country's national strategy centers where it does. Physicist Pan Jianwei, often called China's father of quantum, reportedly briefed President Xi Jinping directly back in 2016, laying out the future of quantum information science in a meeting that set off what many now consider the largest single coordinated national investment in quantum technology in history. Pan went on to found a quantum physics department at USTC that has since become the launchpad for China's most significant quantum spin-offs, including Origin Quantum and Quantum C-Tech, both of which now operate as commercial businesses while remaining deeply tied to the academic research that produced them. This fusion of state funding, academic research, and commercial spin-offs, functioning almost like one unified machine, is exactly what defines China's centralized model, and it stands in sharp contrast to the more distant relationship between government funding and private companies that typically defines the American approach. If learning about these behind-the-scenes power players genuinely shifts how you see this race, that's exactly the kind of deeper context this channel exists to deliver. So make sure that subscribe button is already clicked before we move on. Let's look at some of the actual scientific milestones each side has hit, because the headlines alone don't always capture how far this research has actually progressed. China's Zhujiang photonic quantum computer demonstrated what scientists call quantum computational advantage back in 2020, successfully performing a calculation known as boson sampling in a way that would be effectively impossible for classical supercomputers to match in any reasonable amount of time. China has built on that momentum with its Zhuchangzi superconducting processor, achieving results comparable to Google's own celebrated quantum supremacy claims, making China the only country to have demonstrated computational advantage on two entirely different hardware platforms. Just this year, researchers at the Hefei lab published breakthrough findings in major journals, including Nature and Science, covering scalable quantum repeater technology and device-independent quantum key distribution over genuinely impressive distances, pushing forward what secure quantum communication can realistically achieve. On the American side, IBM's roadmap keeps hitting its targets, with the Kookaburra modular processor expected this year, built specifically to merge quantum memory with logic operations, representing a key building block toward the kind of large-scale, error-corrected quantum computer that could eventually surpass anything China has shown so far. Both sides are clearly making real, verifiable scientific progress, which is exactly why this race stays so tight and so hard to call definitively in either direction. Now let's address the elephant in the room, the part of the story that explains why governments are dumping billions of dollars into something most ordinary people will never directly interact with. Once quantum computers reach sufficient scale and reliability, they're widely expected to eventually break many of the encryption systems currently protecting global banking, military communications, and government secrets, a scenario cybersecurity experts often call a harvest now, decrypt later threat. That means rival nations could theoretically be intercepting and stockpiling encrypted data right now, waiting patiently for quantum computers powerful enough to crack it open down the line. This single security implication alone explains why the United States has placed export controls on advanced quantum equipment headed to China, and why China has kept sourcing critical components from non-American suppliers in countries like Germany to keep its programs moving despite those restrictions. If this sounds more like a spy thriller than a tech headline, that's because in many ways it genuinely is, and this race carries national security implications that go far beyond simple bragging rights over who built the fastest machine. Let's also touch on quantum's economic upside beyond just security, because this race isn't purely about defense and espionage. Quantum computing's exceptional processing power could dramatically speed up drug development by simulating molecular interactions with a precision classical computers simply can't match, potentially compressing years of pharmaceutical research into a fraction of the time. Materials science is another massive opportunity, with quantum simulations potentially unlocking entirely new battery chemistries, more efficient solar panels, and novel materials that simply don't exist with today's conventional research methods. So here's my honest take after digging through everything currently known about this contest between two genuinely different national strategies. China's centralized, heavily funded, state-directed model has produced undeniable results, including world-leading quantum communication infrastructure, real demonstrations of computational advantage, and a physical research campus in Hefei with no real Western equivalent in scale or ambition. The United States, meanwhile, keeps leaning on its decentralized strengths, a sprawling network of competing private companies, deep venture capital backing, and academic institutions all racing forward independently, betting that variety of approach will eventually outpace any single centrally planned strategy, no matter how well funded. Neither side has definitively won this race yet, and depending on which specific area you examine, from quantum communication to quantum hardware to raw patent volume, the lead genuinely keeps shifting between these two technological superpowers. What's absolutely certain is that the data centers being built right now in Hefei and Poughkeepsie, along with dozens of other facilities across both countries, represent one of the most consequential technology races of our generation, with implications stretching from national security to medicine to the global balance of economic power itself. If you found this breakdown genuinely useful, hit that like button right now, because stories like this deserve to reach far more people than the algorithm usually allows. Subscribe with notifications on because this race is moving incredibly fast, and I'll be covering every major breakthrough from both sides as new milestones get announced in the months ahead. Drop a comment telling me which country you think will reach a truly practical, fault-tolerant quantum computer first, and let me know if you'd like a dedicated follow-up video digging even deeper into either America's or China's specific approach. Before we wrap up completely, I want to rewind a bit because understanding how this race actually started genuinely helps explain why it's grown so intense by 2026. China's quantum journey goes back further than most people realize, all the way to 2001, when the Chinese Academy of Sciences set up its first provincial-level lab dedicated entirely to quantum information, at a time when many domestic academic circles still viewed the whole field with skepticism, with some critics reportedly writing it off as little more than pseudoscience. One of the scientists involved later described those years as feeling lonely and helpless for nearly 2 decades, watching the field slowly earn legitimacy only after sustained government backing finally arrived in the early 2000s through a dedicated national research program. That patience eventually paid off in a massive way, particularly after 2013, when leaked intelligence documents revealed that Western intelligence agencies had developed sophisticated methods for cracking encrypted internet traffic, a revelation that reportedly sped up China's push toward building unbreakable, quantum-secured communication networks of its own. This historical backdrop matters a lot because it reframes China's current lead in quantum communication not as some sudden recent win, but as the payoff of more than 2 decades of patient, deliberate, state-backed investment that began long before most Western policymakers were paying serious attention. The United States, by comparison, took a more reactive legislative route, passing the National Quantum Initiative Act years later and committing just over $1 billion across roughly 5 years, a figure that looks pretty modest next to the tens of billions China has reportedly poured into its own quantum ecosystem since. If this kind of long-game thinking fascinates you as much as it fascinates me, the idea that today's headlines are really just the latest chapter in a multi-decade strategic story, make sure you're subscribed, because this channel specializes in connecting exactly these kinds of dots. Now let's talk briefly about talent, because building enormous data centers and research campuses means nothing without the scientists and engineers actually capable of using them. China has aggressively recruited and trained quantum physicists through its university system, with USTC becoming one of the most prestigious global destinations for students pursuing quantum information science, backed by a steady pipeline of state scholarships and research funding designed specifically to keep top talent from leaving the country. The United States, on the other hand, has historically relied heavily on its ability to pull in top scientific talent from anywhere in the world, with American universities and tech companies drawing researchers from Europe, Asia, and beyond, building a genuinely global talent pool that domestic-only programs simply can't match. However, this is exactly where some analysts voice real concern about America's long-term competitiveness, pointing to tightening visa policies and rising global competition for skilled researchers as potential threats to the historically open talent pipeline the U.S. quantum ecosystem has relied on for decades. This talent question might honestly end up mattering just as much as the billions being poured into physical infrastructure, because brilliant facilities sitting empty without world-class researchers inside them accomplish absolutely nothing. Let's also address the skeptics for a moment, because I always get comments questioning whether any of this quantum hype is genuinely justified or just another overblown tech buzzword chasing investment dollars. It's true that some of China's specific funding figures are hard to independently verify, with Western analysts often relying on estimates rather than officially confirmed government budget disclosures. And similarly, some American companies have faced criticism for occasionally overstating how close their systems truly are to delivering genuinely practical, real-world quantum advantage. That said, the underlying scientific milestones on both sides, the published peer-reviewed research, the demonstrated computational advantage claims, and the physical infrastructure actually being built right now in cities like Hefei and Poughkeepsie, represent genuine, verifiable progress rather than pure marketing spin. So while healthy skepticism about specific numbers and timelines is always reasonable, writing off this entire race as hype completely overlooks the substantial, measurable progress both countries have already made over the past several years. Let's close this out by looking just a bit further down the road, because the next 2 to 3 years are genuinely shaping up to be the most decisive stretch in this entire race so far. IBM's Kookaburra processor, expected this year, marks a genuine turning point, since it specifically targets the error correction capabilities needed to move beyond today's experimental quantum systems and toward something approaching real-world commercial usefulness. China, meanwhile, keeps expanding its quantum-secured communication backbone while pushing forward on parallel computing architectures, signaling that Beijing has no intention of settling for dominance in just one narrow corner of this broader technological battlefield. Other nations are watching closely too, with the European Union, Japan, and several other countries pouring their own significant funding into quantum research, meaning this story may eventually grow beyond a simple two-country rivalry, even though China and the United States currently command the lion's share of global attention and investment. Whichever way this race ultimately tilts, one thing is absolutely certain. The data centers being built right now in quiet cities most people have never heard of are quietly laying the groundwork for what could become one of the most transformative technological shifts of the entire 21st century. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.